Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, July 27th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Senator J.D. Vance, Donald Trump's running mate in the 2024 presidential election, and how he breaks polling records, and not in a good way. A number of new polls have come out recently showing J.D. Vance with record low approval across the United States, being the least liked vice presidential nominee in decades, according to the data that we have on hand. Far lower than Sarah Palin, who was nominated for the vice presidency back in 2008, lower than Mike Pence, who served out his term as vice president, lower than Kamala Harris herself when she was chosen back in 2020, and again, the least liked vice presidential nominee in decades. And breaking these polling records are ones that show a continuation of what we've known about J.D. Vance from the very beginning, that J.D. Vance was the wrong choice for Donald Trump in this election. But it was clear from the outside, but on the inside, Donald Trump genuinely believed that J.D. Vance was the right candidate. But I can't help but believe that numbers that we see from way back when in the 2022 Senate race and his approval rating in his own home state might be indicative of how he would be on the national level. But this is an article actually from 2021 talking about the moral collapse of J.D. Vance, someone who had been very popularized during the 2016 election, had been a state senator, and had been known across the state, pretty much had a pretty strong presence in American politics, but it first started off in the 2024 election and in the 2020 election and 2016 election as very different people. In 2016, he was very anti-Trump, even said that in some circumstances he would consider voting for Hillary Clinton, then came into 2020 as a full-fledged supporter of President Trump, and then came into 2024 as someone who was vying for the opportunity to go ahead and be Donald Trump's running mate. Now, I do want to say, when we're talking about J.D. Vance as a candidate, he has a lot more scandals than what it's worth. I think that the scandals that are the most important, though, to the base and to what happens in this election is the fact that he has been very, very, very against Donald Trump from nearly the very beginning. In 2015, he was very public in his support for other candidates. Evan McConnell, for instance, he endorsed publicly, and then had made a number of different comments on the mainstream media talking about how Donald Trump was, wrong for the state, wrong for the state of Ohio, wrong for the country at large, how Hillary Clinton may even be his potential choice here. And so many different things that he said, going so far as to J.D. Vance even possibly referring to Donald Trump as Hitler. Now, this is all something that has been really uncovered since the 2022 Senate Republican primary. These are things that we came to know back in 22, and really doesn't shake up the race in the sense that it isn't going to break the Trump campaign. But J.D. Vance is just uniquely unlikable, and the polling is starting to reflect that. And it comes at a time where there's all this conversation around VP. By the way, I wanted to correct something. I just realized that I referred to him as a state senator. He was not a state senator. I was thinking in my mind about his opponent in the race there. I'm trying to think. I believe it was Matt Dolan. Anyways, back to the point. With all this conversation around J.D. Vance, around the vice presidential nominee, I mean, we are in a position where this is a very, very, very unique situation. A brand new vice presidential nominee because Donald Trump decided he didn't want to run with his old one. A brand new vice presidential nominee on the Democratic side because the president at the top of the ticket decided he wasn't going to run. I mean, we are in for a historic election in more ways than one. And now the Democratic Party has a prime opportunity to choose somebody good for the race. And Kamala Harris really has the cream of the crop. On the flip side, J.D. Vance was probably the worst choice that Donald Trump could have chosen, and again, the data is beginning to reflect that. He is uniquely unpopular in a way we have not seen in decades. Sarah Palin, who has long been seen as the worst vice presidential choice in the 21st century for any major party ticket, came into the election after her first speech was positively viewed in the nation by 28 percentage points. Granted, 3 election cycles ago, we were far less polarized as a nation, but showing that 28 points really goes to show that Sarah Palin came into this with a very high approval. And I mean, it is also recent elections, too. You see that Kamala Harris, when she was first announced as the vice presidential nominee, she was very unpopular from the campaign season. She was very unpopular going into the time at which she was selected for vice president, but then she turned it all around. She was chosen by Vice President Joe Biden at the time to be her running mate, and immediately her numbers started to go up. Plus 11, plus 6, plus 5, plus 4, and it averaged out to an overall positive, and by the time we reached Election Day, Kamala Harris was far more approved than she was disapproved. Same thing with Vice President Mike Pence. When he was introduced into the race, the numbers were largely very popular. Some from ABC News and Washington Post saying plus 17, plus 11, at worst minus 1, minus 5. This is the average here for J.D. Vance. Just 32% of the nation approves of JD Vance as a candidate. And you find that the numbers actually boil down to be far, far, far worse for JD Vance than anyone really could have imagined. Because when you take a look at the data amongst independent voters, it isn't just that Democrats don't like JD Vance. He struggles with independent voters because in 4 of the 5 polls, his unfavorability rating is double digits higher than his favorability rating. And the 5th poll here, that isn't to say the one poll out there is saying he's approved of, actually shows him 8 points underwater amongst independents. And so it's a pretty consistent thing across independents, across voters in this country, that JD Vance is not a strong candidate. And that begs the question, do Republicans have buyer's remorse? Because we're starting to see that people are questioning, including many people on the Trump team, figuring out, was JD Vance the right choice for Donald Trump? And it was clear from the beginning that they didn't believe JD Vance would have the ability to debate Kamala Harris to the best of his ability. If you watch his 2022 Senate debate, you'll know that Tim Ryan, based on many different analysis points of many different political pundits, had a very strong debate performance against JD Vance, not because Tim Ryan was, hitting it out of the park, but rather because JD Vance failed to do anything that was really strong in that debate. He didn't hold his ground. He couldn't rebut many of these main points. And the problem, too, isn't just that JD Vance can't do well at a debate. Watch him at a rally. Take a look at any of the clips from his recent rallies with Donald Trump or on his own. They aren't strong. He's awkward on stage. This whole idea that Donald Trump needed someone with heavy media presence and someone who was likable because Donald Trump isn't on the national level. JD Vance should have been that. Any VP nominee should have brought that in the same way that Mike Pence did, and it did not. JD Vance is bad on TV, he's bad press, he's bad in terms of approvals, and election history doesn't exactly excite me either. Because I'm looking at the 2022 Senate results too and understanding, and I said this before, that JD Vance far underperformed every other Republican in the state. And you can see that in the shift map from 2020 in an election year, where Republicans won the national popular vote by 3. Keep in mind that in the same map, that Donald Trump won by 8.1% against Joe Biden, Donald Trump lost the popular vote. Republicans lost it by 4.5%. In 2022, they won it by 3 points. That is an 8-point swing from 2020. In Ohio, shifted entirely to the left. I mean, every single county with very minimal differences. Very big shift in favor of the Democrats. And what mattered was that although JD Vance did win, you can see it as a point of comparison not only from 2020, but compared to every other statewide Republican that ran for a race across Ohio. It even goes down to the governor's race. Mike DeWine got 63% of the vote, and you might be thinking, okay, maybe the electorate is more competitive and JD Vance is just roped into that because it was a race that Democrats invested in and had more money in, and maybe that would be right if we didn't have that many other races to take a look at statewide. When you take a look at the Attorney General's race, 60-40. The State Auditor race, 59-41. Secretary of State race, 60-39. Supreme Court Chief Justice, 56-44, 57-43, 57-43. Treasurer across the state, 59-41. It'd be one thing if Mike DeWine was uniquely popular, which he was, and was able to throw this election and do so exceptionally well. It'd be another thing if it wasn't just him doing exceptionally well and that every Republican was doing exceptionally well. And that's the reality we're in. Everybody else outperformed JD Vance in a way that was phenomenal for them and showed just how weak JD Vance was as a candidate. Because based on the voting base in the state of Ohio and based on who turned out to vote, at baseline partisan vote, Republicans won Ohio by roughly 20 percentage points, where JD Vance was only able to win by 6. I genuinely don't understand why Donald Trump decided to choose him as the vice presidential running mate in the first place. I really couldn't pinpoint what level of electability he added to the ticket other than the fact that he was young. Because everything else that I know about JD Vance is the exact reason why I didn't even imagine him passing a vet in the first place. When we see the comments that JD Vance made about Donald Trump in 2016, we're talking 8 years ago. There's a significant group of people across this country who have gone in from 2016 backing Trump, not backing him in 2020, and not backing him again in 2024. It seems that JD Vance came in with a very different circumstance, and one that really doesn't appeal to that many voters. There aren't that many new Donald Trump voters unless these are people that had never voted in an election prior or are newly eligible voters. People who have just turned 18, people who have just turned 19, just turned 20, who are voting in the electorate for the first time. Looking at Gen Z, maybe there you could find that people in middle school didn't back Trump. I was in middle school when Trump was first elected. And so putting all that into perspective, maybe that's what we're looking for. But JD Vance at baseline, being someone who was all in for somebody besides Trump, never Trump, moving over to Trump. I mean, adamant, we saw Republicans never Trumping during the Republican primary, but came around to speak at the convention, came around to speak at rallies in September, October, and November of 2016. What we find this time is that JD Vance went from being never Trump to all in and to now being his running mate, but the comments he has made in the past really make him so unelectable when it comes down to just moral clarity. People do not look at JD Vance and say, this guy sticks to his guns, this guy sticks to what he says, and that's a problem because Donald Trump already has that reputation. That's where Mike Pence came in and really counteracted that in being the more presidential figure, in being the more honest figure, in being the person that was straight and talked to the people, even though he didn't have the charisma of Donald Trump. He had something that voters really lacked to seeing on the Republican side. That was honesty, that was integrity, at least in terms of perception. And so when Mike Pence got up on that debate stage against Tim Kaine, it seemed to Republicans, by a point of comparison, like a breath of fresh air. And to the American public, exactly that. But now even the Trump team may not even get it to a point where JD Vance accepts a vice presidential debate because they know that this decision was one that was made in a very rushed way and voters are reacting negatively. And as Kamala Harris is given the prime opportunity to narrow down her search and really investigate who would be her best running mate, she is in a very strong position. Bloomberg today saying that the race is narrowing down to Mark Kelly, senator from Arizona, strong pick, Governor Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, strong pick, Governor Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, strong pick. We are seeing Kamala Harris's campaign and the Democratic Party revived in real time, while Republicans are scrambling. And data point after data point after data point shows JD Vance doing uniquely horrible amongst the American press. Because even Kamala Harris ended up being popular. You can see that even Tim Kaine through Election Day, in the immediate aftermath of the announcement, was far more popular than he was unpopular. And the one thing about a vice presidential running mate is that you never, ever want them dragging you down. They can only be an add-on because they wouldn't even be here without you. You won the nomination. Hillary Clinton won the nomination, and I don't think that Tim Kaine hurt Hillary Clinton in 2016. I don't think Kamala Harris hurt Joe Biden in 2020. I don't think Mike Pence hurt Donald Trump in 2016. In every instance we have seen, with very few exceptions, maybe Sarah Palin in 2008, with very limited exceptions, and also especially very early on, they have only ever been perceived and understood as value adds or overall net neutral. In this election, I do believe that JD Vance is an overall net negative, that he drags down Donald Trump's electability, and more numbers are showing that Kamala Harris is in a far better position than President Biden, that Kamala Harris is in a far better position than where she was 2 weeks ago with speculative polling. And things will only start to get better. With the $350 million across Democratic accounts since the announcement of Joe Biden departing from the race, Democrats have a war chest to win this election. Not to mention that they have a brand new candidate and a brand new vice presidential candidate that they can bring into the fray. Because this narrowing and tightening of the poll has already happened post-Republican National Convention. The 4-day of consistent 24/7 coverage by the mainstream media, no longer a thing. It happened, came and went, and it was used entirely to attack Joe Biden. Well, now he's no longer the candidate. On the other side of things, too, you're finding that Kamala Harris coming into this race, Kamala Harris coming into the 2024 election, really doing so well post-RNC, post-assassination attempt, post-JD Vance announcement. If Donald Trump wasn't going to be propped up to a pathway to victory before, there isn't that many more opportunities for him to win back this race if the trend line continues in a leftward direction and in favor of Kamala Harris. Because the Republican Party has been given a very strong opportunity, and against Joe Biden, it very much seemed like Joe Biden was going to lose the election and that Donald Trump was running far ahead of the incumbent president, and that it was one thing after the other that Donald Trump was getting into this race. On the other side of things, now that that is no longer the case, we have to ask and look around and search hard to find areas where Donald Trump could genuinely have a turning of the tides back in his favor, because JD Vance is only continuing to hurt him. What we find, too, is that the first presidential debate, expectations will not be good for Donald Trump. The vice presidential debate will not be good for JD Vance. And then we also have in consideration the Democratic National Convention, where Democrats will have the nomination of Kamala Harris, 24/7 coverage for 4 consistent days, and a lot of enthusiasm around Vice President Harris. We are in for an election that has completely turned 180 because of one president's decision to step down out of the race, and it shows that many of these missteps that were, completely covered up by a lot of positive news around Donald Trump and a lot of negative news around Joe Biden, is now back and exposed in the full spotlight. And JD Vance is front and center. His unpopularity, his unelectability, his being is now being torn apart and put up for display in full force in a way that we didn't see immediately after the announcement, that we didn't see in the weeks leading up to the announcement. And voters, the more they know about JD Vance, the less they like him. And that's bad news because, as I said before, and I will reiterate timelessly, a vice presidential candidate should never have made this much of an impact. And I genuinely believe it when I say it that JD Vance, while may not throw the entire election for Donald Trump, if Donald Trump is to lose the election, JD Vance will be a big part of it. And that's why we knew going into this VP selection that of all people, JD Vance was the worst possible choice. But it looks like that's not the first one Republicans have made this election cycle. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and a playlist of my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.